Okay, so because of God's sovereignty and providence and his plan, facts are only facts, or particulars are only intelligible with respect to the ground of all being and his plan, without which no fact would be discernible or intelligible. Now, when I say that, people can say, well, that's ridiculous. I know plenty of atheists who can pinpoint facts and provide intelligibility. Well, no, you can't, because you just simply haven't pursued their epistemology to its ultimate starting point, which is nowhere. So you can know that the God of the Bible is true, not only or simply because of his sovereign revelation, that all of it, once you understand the basic property and attribute set of the God of the Bible, then you know that intelligibility for particulars or facts is going to require that property set. And without that property set, there cannot be human intelligibility. Now, if somebody says, no, I don't buy that, that's a bunch of balderdash, I say, fine. Explain to me what model of reality that you are actually speaking from, and how does its properties and attributes on an ultimate or outer contextual level provide for the intelligibility of individual facts or particulars. You cannot have a contextless fact.
I still don't see how that relates to specifically the God of the Bible. Like, couldn't there be another God that has like the same properties that you're describing?
Well, that would be the Christian God then.
But does that mean like, but how does that connect to like the stories?
I'll tell you why. Because the Christian God's property set also include his creation, his acting temporally throughout creation and acting providentially. So, for example, you couldn't possibly accuse me of simply fabricating the Christian God's property set when I wasn't around 2,000 years ago. I wasn't around 3,000 years ago. The Bible is a historical product. And so a part of God's property set of both his immutable characteristics and his accidental characteristics are his acts of creation and revelation. And so another thing is, you're going to have to also say, is the current state of affairs, the human condition, normal or abnormal? And if it's abnormal, is there a redemptive program that deals not only with the consequences after death, but the present consequences of the futility of man's thinking? Or do you think that man's thinking is normal? So you see, any other idolatrous God that is presented cannot have the property set of the Christian God. It's impossible.
Because you're saying because.
Well, like here's the problem. Here's the problem. You have been presented that the God of the Bible's property set are the necessary and sufficient conditions for the actuality of temporal facts, but for the intelligibility of those facts. Now, if you don't have a defeater for that, right? But what you want to do in order to defeat the Christian God is not to deny him, but to say, well, there's an alternative. Well, you're only going to be able to do that, excuse me, is if you tell me what your model of reality is. Telling me that there is some potential actual other model of reality out there that is not your own is a logical contradiction. If you don't accept the self-disclosure of the Christian God and his property set as the basis of the actuality of all facts and the intelligibility of facts, then you're going to have to tell me how your world and its ultimacy provides for actuality and intelligibility. And everything that I've just said to you is entirely consistent with and actually drawn from what the Bible teaches.
Well, how do we know the Bible is correct?
Because without it, you couldn't know anything was correct.
Do we know for sure that anything is true?
Listen carefully. The Bible is not just simply a book about some facts. The Bible is a complete model of reality. From Genesis to Revelation, it's a complete model of reality. Now, the reason why you can know that the Bible as a complete package, as a model of reality is true, is because it's indispensable. Without it, you wouldn't be able to know anything is true. You wouldn't even be able to count rocks. You wouldn't even be able to identify that anything is a rock. Now, if you don't accept what I'm saying, then you can tell me that without the God of the Bible being indispensable and the Christian worldview, his self-disclosure being an indispensable frame of reference by which we can have intelligibility for facts, then you can tell me what is the indispensable model of reality or frame of reference that provides you with the ability to have intelligibility for dogs, cats, trees, rocks, or for that matter, the ability to count pebbles.
Can you explain what you mean by intelligibility?
That a particular means something in terms of the nature of reality that it exists in.
Well, I mean, I kind of think.
Can you have a contextless fact?
What do you mean by that?
Can you have a fact that has no context?
I don't know. Probably not.
Okay, well, I'm telling you that the God of the Bible has revealed himself in natural revelation and in special revelation. You and I both know, and all human beings do, insofar as you have a normal brain, that all facts individually and collectively, being that they're temporal facts, are indicative of the eternal. Okay? Temporal facts indicate the eternal. Right? Now you say,
an example about context.
Sure, anyone can jump in.
So let's say one of your really good friends gave you some really, really bad news. And then they told you your mother was murdered on the porch. You just want to find out who was responsible, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But what if it turns out they dropped the bomb on you, and then they say, well, except you guys were playing Uno. And then you find out, well, he just got murdered in a car game. Now, the fact that you thought was the case, it turns out it actually was not, because now you have a broader scope of what was actually being said. So this idea that your mother was like killed and murdered does not exist because there's no context for it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So when you have a broader scope, you can understand that the context that your mother was killed by somebody on the porch doesn't exist because there's no context for it. He was actually talking about a game. So if you don't have a context for something, you can't have effect. That's what Dark is talking about.
Yeah, you cannot have actuality or intelligibility for any fact unless there's a context. Now, when we speak, the context for facts are not always explicitly presented. They're more often implicit, but it is nonetheless there. And so the God of the Bible is the indispensable, irreducible, ultimate, that is the context for everything. In other words, everything is God's creation. It derives its existence, its meaning, and intelligibility because of God's existence. And we know this because of his revelation. Now, when somebody says, well, I don't accept it is revelation, then what they're saying is, they're not saying that the Bible doesn't exist. They're just saying that the entities in question themselves not only are not revelatory, that they don't have authority. then the person themselves is going to be there by implication claiming, hold on one second. The person is claiming self-autonomy to adjudicate particulars and facts. The person themselves will have autonomous reasoning. The mind of man, without any reference to any higher mental authority, is going to make a determination as to what the nature of existence is, whereupon to place facts and interpret those facts. So, for example, as a Christian, if I give an interpretation of facts that is inconsistent with what the Bible says, Tonlock, being a Bible-believing Christian, saying, well, your interpretation is incorrect because, you see, it doesn't conform to the mind of God, who is the autonomous one. But when you reject, when you do not accept that all facts around you indicate the eternal one, and that his special revelation is not self-disclosure, then by default, you are claiming to be in possession of autonomous reasoning, that your mind, or in conjunction with other human minds, is basically able to make a determination as to what the nature of reality is in order to make individual particulars meaningful and intelligible.
I kind of disagree, because I don't think that we can know for certain whether things are true, or for certain what the nature of reality is.
Is that a true statement?
Well, I don't know, but what I'm saying is, like,
if you don't know it's a true statement, why should I pay attention to what you just said?
I don't think we know that anything is true.
No, you're not.
100%.
You see, you're not understanding. Every time you speak, by implication, you're making a truth statement. If you don't know it's true, then why are you predicating?
Because I don't think it's possible to have complete certainty.
Well, how do you know what's possible?
I don't.
Well, then if you don't know what's possible, then then you can't know what it is possible or impossible. So you have to keep your mouth. You have to keep that. No, you just said, I don't think it's possible to do X. Well, you're telling me what's not possible. Where'd you get that
It's
from?
also a truth claim.
Yeah.
It's also asserting his own mind.
You see, if you don't know what the ultimate nature of reality is, what the irreducible, indispensable primary is from which all temporal facts come from, then you have no grounds upon which to assert what is possible or impossible, do you?
No, I'm not trying to.
No, you just did. You just said X is not possible. You just said truth, apprehending truth is not possible. So you're telling me something that's not possible. So it's possible for you to know that something is impossible.
I mean, the same could be said for your argument.
You didn't understand what I just said. You are making statements of possibility and impossibility. Can you make statements of possibility or impossibility without a foundation from which they derive?
It's going to take a minute to think about that.
Okay.
Arbitrarily, you could.
Mm-hmm.
You see, the way that you can know that Jesus Christ was who he said he was, and the Christian scriptures are in fact God's word, is because without them, you are doomed to incoherence and intelligibility. And the only reason why you will not accept that is because you're not willing to examine your world to see if the facts that you think are meaningful actually have meaning. What is the context that provides for it? Imagine I went to my local police precinct and I said, I just saw a murder. And they go, okay, what happened? So the guy came into the room, he pulled out a gun, he shot the other guy in the head, right? And he ran out. So what did he look like? Well, he had red hair, he's about 6 foot tall, and he was kind of hefty, and he walked with a limp. All right. And I keep on giving more details. And then the last detail I give him is that it was an episode of Hawaii Five-0. Now, does that outermost context change the viability and intelligibility of the putative facts that I'm presenting to the police? The outermost context changes everything. It can mean the difference between something being actual or not actual. It makes the difference between something being human comprehensible or not comprehensible or intelligible.
Why do you think you have the authority to determine which outer context is true?
Oh, I don't have the authority. What I'm saying to you is that the God of the Bible, his property set, and his self-disclosure are indispensable. That's how you can know they're true. If you say, I don't accept that, then what you're claiming is the God of the Bible, his revelation, is not indispensable for the establishment of the actuality of facts and the intelligibility of facts. Then I will say to you, good. Then explain to me, what is your model of reality? What is the most indispensable thing of existence that provides for everything existing and its intelligibility? What is your ultimate commitment?
In other words, what's the outermost contextual layer?
What's your ultimate commitment that provides for all sub-beliefs? Because if you don't have an ultimate commitment, then anything goes. You have no grounding. So to show you, I'm not presenting to you that Christianity, the Christian worldview, is a better worldview. I'm not saying that Christianity is more coherent. My position is, and I'm repeating what other theological giants have said, Christianity is the only intelligible and coherent worldview, and the denial of it results in complete and catastrophic unintelligibility. That's how you can know it's true. Because if I just start saying to you, well, you know what, Christianity is true. Jesus rose again from the dead. You could sit there and go, well, I don't believe those witnesses. They could have been hallucinating. Or you could sit there and go, well, in a really big universe, sometimes really weird things happen in isolation. But on average, things happen on a regular basis. But sometimes there are anomalies that are just unknown. So it doesn't matter what lines of reasoning I give to you. You can just simply reinterpret it away. Do you know why? It's because you are already operating from a position of no God. It's not that you're unpersuaded. You have already decided that you can reason about the apple on the counter and about the dog running in the backyard, excuse me, or the sky is blue without necessitating the reference of God as the indispensable, irreducible primary. So there is no neutrality toward God, in spite of the fact that people will profess their neutrality. One of my brothers said years ago, and I'll never forget it, and he was studying some theological works at the time, and he said to me, talk is cheap. Okay? People will Bolshevik. Oh, I'm not saying God doesn't exist. Oh, yes, you are. Because all I have to say is, do you assert that God is the indispensable, necessary prerequisite for everything? And if the person says no, then they have denied God. Because in a world where God is the irreducible, indispensable primary. So the point is this: it's either the God of the Bible and his loving and gracious self-disclosure of himself, whereupon he commands you and I to repent. So not only that we can be redeemed in terms of we will not be eternally separated from him in the lake of fire, but so that in every area of life we can be redeemed and we can be saved from the incoherence and unintelligibility. The smartest scientists in the world, if they're not Christian, their scientific theorizing is gobbledygook because it comes from a chance world. Now, I am not saying that an atheist or an unbeliever cannot come to know things and discover things about the world. But the only reason why I believe that an unbeliever God denier can is because he actually lives in God's world, and God has constructed a world that even unbelievers, through mental effort and acuity, can discover some things about God's creation in spite of the fact that they deny that God is the necessary prerequisite and they're inconsistent with their reasoning. But when somebody says, I don't need your God, I don't need the God of the Bible, you haven't proven it, and the very statement, you haven't proven it, is the denial of it. At least if you're acquainted with the basic concepts and storyline or plot of the Christian scriptures, if somebody says, well, you haven't proven it, then that is the denial of what the Bible claims for itself, and it is the denial of the Christian worldview. And what it does is it therefore renders any predication or assertion that anyone makes as being baseless, and it has no foundation or grounding. We had an atheist in here earlier who wanted to say, well, you haven't persuaded me about your God. And I said, good. Then what is your outermost context that's going to provide for the actuality and intelligibility facts? And he goes, the laws of nature. And I said, are the laws of nature, do they secure themselves? Are they ultimate and eternal and unconditionally non-dependent? Or is there something that is an outer layer context that is ultimate, that secures that seemingly the laws of nature? Or otherwise, what you think are the laws of nature is simply the appearance of continuity. Okay? You know, that happens in movies all the time. They film scenes out of order, right? And they even have specialists in movies that are called, you can see it in the credits, that they're in charge of continuity, that certain parameters stay the same. So if we have certain things that are continuous or regular, we call that continuity. But the continuity could be actual or it could be illusory. So when an unbeliever says, well, I don't need your God, I have the laws of nature, I say, good. In my world, the laws of nature are real only because they're instituted by God and they're secured by God. When you refer to the laws of nature, are they actual? Is this continuity of existence? Is it illusory or is it actual? And if it's actual, what secures it? Is it itself or is it something else?
I don't think we know.
Well, then that's the problem. Then if in your denial that the Christian God and that the mind and plan of God in creation is the ground of all existence and temporal facts and wisdom and knowledge, then you cannot know anything, in spite of the fact that you think you do. And if you tell me that you know one thing, I have a few questions for you. If God isn't necessary, then how do you know anything? In the Christian worldview, I can know what my mother's middle name is because God's created a world where people can communicate certain facts that are objective.
All right. I still don't understand why it has to be the Christian God, but I have to go now anyway. So,
well, if you have a God who's not omniscient, what if he constructs a world where you can't know things?
Well, what if there is a God that's omniscient that just didn't do all the things in the Bible.
But I'm not talking about that God.
Well, why
What do you mean?
couldn't that
What do
other
you
God
mean?
have-
What do you mean? Well, here's the problem. Now what you're doing is you're talking about one or more gods as though they were possibilities. That's incoherent. God, by definition, is not a possibility. God, by definition, will be that which is ultimate, that prescribes what is possible and impossible. So if you do not accept the God of the Bible as the indispensable origin of what is possible and impossible, then you're going to have to tell me what foundation you're speaking from, because you cannot appeal to other worldviews other than your own. And if you do, that's logically incoherent.
All right, I think we're just kind of talking in circles. So thank you.
Wait, hold on a second. I haven't spoken in circles. I have given you. Oh, you see that? Here's another example, folks. Do you see this, folks? Now you'll notice I went down straightforwardly, step by step, transcendental reasoning that God is a transcendental necessity, right? And because he's confronted with his own sin and the futility of his own autonomous reasoning, rather than admit it, he wants to straw man my position as saying I'm talking in circles. You see how the sinful human heart operates?
Why are all of the atheists in here so stupid?